So Brussels sprouts. So the beautiful thing about spice is that you can use it in an Indian fashion with a piece of produce that's typically not associated with that cuisine, and then transform that produce from something familiar to something exotic. And that's really what I love to use aromatics for, which is to say to elevate really simple food into a surprising experience. So the key with this Brussels sprout is that I'm going to fry them. So when I think about what I'm going to do with the produce, that helps me to decide how to prepare it. So because I'm going to fry them, or deep fry them essentially, in a little bit of mustard oil and a little bit of vegetable oil, I don't want them cut too fine because they will actually just break apart in the oil. But neither do I want them whole, because if they're whole and I deep fry them, it's going to take a lot longer to cook to the inside and they'll burn on the outside. And while I do love a caramelised Brussels sprout, there is a level of caramelisation that begins to interfere with the result of the spice flavour. And so I'm kind of offsetting all the time, because how you prepare produce is almost like the house frame that you then clad in spice. Brussels sprout is really rich. Once it's become fried, any food really, it becomes weighted by the oil. And so to combat that with the spicing, I'm going to focus on a little bit of acidity, some earth spice to ground it, and then some pungent spice to hold all of that flavour in my mouth so that the experience of eating it is delicious and solid, and that I can have all the time in the world to interpret those tastes. If you do enjoy this recipe, it's very helpful if you can like the recipe and subscribe to the channel. That's enormous for me. It helps me to keep going with what I'm doing. So this is going to be on high heat, and what I'm going to do is grab my vegetable oil, my mustard oil. I never actually deep fry just solely in mustard oil, or not very often, and the reason for that is mustard oil is really, really viscous. It's very thick and it's very rich. And so while I want some of that flavour profile, I also want to thin out some of its intensity, and this is what the vegetable oil is going to do. So I'm going to put 2 cups in there, and then around a cup of mustard oil. The way that we think about spice in terms of relating it also to the vegetable has a powerful impact on the end result of flavour. Brussels sprouts are beautifully nutty, and there's a recessed sweetness which aligns very much with cumin seed. So this is going to be the hero of the dish, because they're a natural marriage. So the thing about aromatics and produce, aromatics and fat, when you're talking about even how spice relates to each other, what it does is spice or produce will seek out similar flavours and reach into that and accelerate it. They'll also reach into flavours that are opposing, so contrasting flavours, and emphasise. So the same way that if you put salt and sugar together, the salt makes the sugar sweeter and the sugar makes the salt saltier. So you're always playing with creating harmony by creating recognition between those flavours that are the same, and then putting some contrast in there to create some opposition as well. And that little push and pull of tension is where flavour is, it's where flavour meets, in the tension points. And so the art of spicing is the art of knowing when to pull and knowing when to relax and let it go a little bit. We're going to use 2 types of cumin seed because we're going to scaffold that flavour. So I'm going to enunciate that cumin seed flavour a little further by putting ground cumin behind it. Coriander, because it's cumin seed's best friend. Turmeric for some structure in there. And if you would like to know more about the structural quality of turmeric, there is a video on YouTube under the Spice 101 category that goes into that a little bit more. Chili for a little bit of height and heat. Cinnamon for warmth and familiarity. A pink salt that's nice and fine and also disperses really beautifully through the palate, so that the end experience of flavour is very evenly communicated throughout the entire dish. And I just like something a little bit non-traditional for acidity, and I'm going to use sumac fresh ginger in there is a little bit of astringent punch. Where are you, ginger? Here you are. Okay. So this is the base. This is my vegetable. This is going to get fried, and then these will be tempered in ghee, and I'm just going to put that together. So there is a real compilation effect to cooking with spice. So they're going to spit. It's the only problem with frying Brussels sprout. So if you have a deep fryer, it'll help eliminate the spatter. If you have an oil net, that's really effective too. Or the other option is you just put them in the oven. What I'm going to do is bring the pan out here, the frying pan, and do sort of a flat lay of spice. It's one of the ways I teach because it begins to show you what spice actually looks like and what flavour looks like. So I'll explain. So when you're talking about spice, it actually will tell you a lot just visually. And by that I mean you get to know what colour signifies when it comes to flavour, what impact texture has as well, and then what contrast is, or how contrast is shown and what that's going to feel like on the palate. So one thing about understanding produce is as soon as you deep fry something, salt goes through it with accelerated speed, so you need less. If I was to roast those, I would use more salt than I will now because I've deep fried them. So I'm going to use like a shy teaspoon of salt. Actually, I'm going to use 2/3 of a teaspoon, and that's going to be enough. So turmeric is there for bitterness and structure. Bitter quality will also play into the recessed bitterness of Brussels sprout as well, so there'll be a nice little communion there. So just around 1/3 of a teaspoon. So cumin seed's the star of the show. This is the one spice you can use quite a lot of, or one of the spices you can use quite a lot of without having the palate default to bitter. So around 1.5 teaspoons, a generous 1/3 of a teaspoon of ground cumin to push the cumin seed out further, and then coriander to create some density in the pan. Coriander has a beautiful effect when it comes to volume. It sort of fluffs up the other spice that's in the pan alongside it and creates this, really full sort of a mouthfeel. Cinnamon, like a shy 1/3 of a teaspoon. Cinnamon is warmth, familiarity, and it's also a little wooded, so it's going to play into the woody character of the Brussels sprout and also into the cumin seed as well. Sumac, 1/2 teaspoon. I want some acid in there, I want some lift. Likewise chilli, 1/3 of a teaspoon, and that's going to provide a little bit more acceleration as well. A little bit of ginger grated straight in. Ginger in this context is really beautiful because it's wet, it's a fresh spice, so it has this beautiful, delicious wet texture, and it's quite sharp. And this dish is going to need a little bit of sharp attention because there's a lot of fullness and a lot of fat in the Brussels sprout, and there is a lot of earth and a lot of density in this spice. So if you have a look, I'm kind of going to try and talk you through it a little bit. You can see from the colour tonality that this part of the spicing is quite flat. It's very earthy, and the tone is a really subtle gradient in colour tone. So what this signifies, even around to the cinnamon, is that signifies harmony. Now harmony is all very good and well, but if you're too harmonious, if there's too much same, then the end experience of the dish is quite flat because there's not enough interest point to punctuate and delineate from one spice to the next. There's not enough exclamation, there's not enough change, there's not enough shift or difference. And the thing about the mouth is it's very similar to us as people. It loves things to be the same as long as they're different. So that's the complexity of the human condition. So we don't want things to change too much, but we also don't want to do the same thing day in, day out. So there's a happy middle state, and that's what this dish will end up being. The salt, you can see, does pop, so that's going to pop flavour through. And then this little arm over here, this little colour spectrum, is where you're going to find the lift and the difference. Turmeric is bitter, and that will give some undercarriage. And these two are going to give height and length and excitement. So an acid and a chili. So this is length skyward, and this is like a rainbow. This is just the the shot of lightning in a dark sky. So this is the bit that's going to really elevate the dish. Ginger over here is sharp and a different texture altogether. Because it's wet and fresh and not dry, what that means is that it's going to awaken a part of the palate that would otherwise be left untouched, because fresh spice hits at a different space in the mouth than dried spice does. On top of this, I'm going to put ghee. There's already mustard oil in this Brussels sprout because it's been fried, so there's already a pungent hot floral quality. That's what mustard oil provides. What I want now is softness, sweetness, and just a general feeling of round pleasure, and that's going to complete the dish, and that's ghee. Maybe a tablespoon and a half. This is going to be tempered on the stove. Brussels sprout gets tossed through, and then it can cook down for anywhere between 15 and 45 minutes. The length of time is going to increase the intensity of expression with the spice. The one other thing I'm actually going to do is chop some fresh tomato and put it through once the spice is tempered and before the Brussels sprout enters, because this end result is going to need a little bit of fresh sweetness and simplicity to break up, or to be, I guess, a bit of a halfway point between the richness and intensity of the oil Brussels sprouts and the density and sweet complexity of the spice blend. One thing I am actually going to add is a little bit of jaggery. So jaggery, right here, this little ball, is unrefined cane sugar, and it has a very delicious, rich caramel molasses, textural, fatty sweetness. It's beautiful with spice because it just lightens some of the tension, some of the flavour tension, some of the complexity. That's what sugars are good for when cooking. So that goes in. I actually think that's enough. And just a little stir through. I don't actually want to cook it down too much. Just taste again. Oh yeah, it's just, it's so different, oh my gosh. So that little bit of tomato and freshness, instantly, there's acidity and there's sweetness, but the dirty, kind of dark, deep flavour is still bedded down. So you've got flavour that hits you here, but that also sort of resonates out and it lightens up, and that's really what I'm looking for, is that deep flavour that doesn't hold me down. Brussels sprouts in. You see how much oil has come off those Brussels sprouts. If you don't like your food quite this intense, roast them in the oven with a little bit of mustard oil on top at 180 degrees until they're caramelised, spicing the same. Now you can keep cooking this, and the longer you cook it, the more intense the flavours will become. So like I always say, time has a flavour, and the flavour of time is generally intensity. Oh, that's just perfect. I always think of this food in terms of rice and chapati, but you can really eat it in any way that you like. You could make a beautiful lean roast lamb or lamb chop and put this alongside it with a fresh garden salad, and you've got this really beautiful, interesting, complete meal. That's the beauty of spice. You can translate it, you can adopt it, you can have it be traditional, you can do anything you want with it. And all it does is make things better. It's sweet and fresh and rich and dark all at the same time. And that's the kind of food that floats my boat.